today. Y'all, let me start by saying I am so excited about the gifts that you have, and I know that you are seeking ways to use those God-given gifts in the world. You wouldn't be watching these videos if you weren't hoping to do something amazing with your life. And I truly believe that if each person who is listening to this were to use her gifts to the fullest potential, together, you, me, and every woman listening right now, that would be earth-shattering. So last week we talked a good bit about how God works to make sure his children are set up for success in the plans that he has for them. And we took a look at David and how God prepared him for the battle with Goliath. Now, if you haven't watched that video, you might want to. I'll link it for you down in the comments below, and you can click on that after you watch this or before. Either way, they both make sense without each other. So listen, if you've spent any amount of time studying God's word, you know that David is a man whose story is so much more than a shepherd boy who fights a giant. He was one of the most successful kings of Israel. He was a psalmist, a musician, a father, a warrior, and is frankly one of the greatest men that we read about in the Bible. And by the way, none of that was an accident. God created David with a very specific purpose in mind, and then he crafted him to be successful in that path according to the Lord's purposes, right? So we've already looked at how God put three very specific things in place to set David up to win the battle against Goliath, which starts him on that path to success. Those three things we talked about last week. He made sure that David was in the right place. He gave David the right skills, and God gave David the right plan. And within those parameters, David was obedient and went into battle knowing God would go before him. But without David's setup, followed by his obedience, he might never have become the man that we study in the Bible. So ladies, let's back this up to you. Can you relate? Like sometimes, honestly, I look at the skill set I have and I feel like God is sitting on the edge of his seat, peering down at me and just waiting to see what great thing I'm going to do that day. And man, let me tell you, those days are so empowering, right? Like those are the days that most things get checked off the to-do list. Not everything, that never happens. But those are the days that I cook dinner for my family. Those are the days that I'm super motivated, and while I'm driving, I'm brainstorming all these ideas, and I'm thinking about content for this channel, and I've knocked out 1,000,000 graphics on my computer, and everything just seems to click, right? Like everything is moving at a fantastic pace. But then, and we have these too, there are days that I just don't. Nothing happens, y'all. I can't find my focus. I look around and see a pile of stuff over here to do, or a list of things on this notebook that I use all the time of things to accomplish, or, oh, and please know, there's that thing that I haven't started for a really long time, and today is not that day either. I'm out. But here's the thing. On those days too, God is still sitting on the edge of his seat, peering down at me, just waiting to see what great thing I'll do with the skills he's given me. And he knows I can do the things. He's anxiously waiting for me to step into my full potential. And sometimes, frankly, I disappoint him. But he continues to wait. He doesn't stop waiting and watching and rooting for me. Listen though, okay? I'm no one special. I don't have my name on some super special God's favorites list. I have my own unique giftings, and I also have my own unique and very strong weaknesses. You have your own unique gifts, ones that are your very own. And you also, just like everyone else, have your own set of weaknesses. And let's not be foolish and think the devil doesn't know those things either. He does, and he fights against those gifts with every weapon he's got. Those are the non-productive days, or the days that every step is met with a struggle. It's a battle, right? But it's one that we know who wins, and I know I want to fight on the right side of things. So speaking of battles, let's come back to David, right? Because that's a story where God wins because David stepped out in faith and did the hard thing. Okay, go back to what we know. Remember that this battle took place in the valley of Elah, and the Israelite army and the Philistine army were at a stalemate, right? Because neither army from the top of the ridge wanted to charge down into the valley and give up the advantage of the high ground, having, that happen. That's a bad idea. So in biblical times, they had a solution for those moments. Each army would send in their best warrior to the fight, and it was agreed upon that it was going to be a one-on-one combat to the death. And they also believed that it was not really a battle of men, but a battle of the gods, that the most powerful god of these armies would be the winner. And up against the seasoned giant warrior Goliath was the small but faithful shepherd boy David. But you see, we know that the God of Abraham and Isaac, the creator of the world, including Goliath, was walking into battle with David. And we know from looking at the scene last week that God prepared David by putting him again in the right place with the right skills and the right plan. But today, we're going to take a look at how God gave David the right tools. So often, we underestimate the shepherd of biblical times, and I personally think this is a huge mistake. After all, when Jesus was born, God told the shepherds first. Moses, when he fled Egypt, became a shepherd in Midian, and it was when he was with his sheep that God spoke to him from a burning bush. And of course, we can't leave out Jesus, the ultimate shepherd, and his many, many references to caring for his flock. Shepherds are, despite their consideration as lowly or unskilled, actually quite important in God's eyes. So this idea of shepherds being lowly and unskilled could not be further from the truth. We already know that in 1 Samuel 17, verses 34 and 35, David tells Saul of his great bravery as a warrior to protect his flock. It says, "But David said to Saul, 'Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it.'" It's easy to see what a strong fighter and brave fighter David must have been. And we know, based on this story, he tells Saul that God gave David the right skills. But he also gave David, for this battle with Goliath, the right tools. You see, back then, shepherds were also called slingers. Many armies during this time would actually employ slingers to fight because the accuracy of a slinger was unmatched. They would have cavalry, they would have infantry, and then they would have archers and slingers. So when I was a little girl, I want to tell you a story. I spent most of my summers in the piney woods of East Texas, and we would fish in my grandparents' pond. We played outside in that red dirt that got everywhere, and we probably ran with sticks, which always made my mom nervous. But one of the traditions was that my grandfather made each one of his grandkids a slingshot. And he would search the woods for just the right branch. He wanted to find one that had that perfect Y shape, and he wanted to find one that was small enough to fit our child-sized hands, which in retrospect was probably pretty hard because my grandfather, I remember his hands were some of the biggest hands I'd ever seen. They just were giant and strong. And he would fiddle with these tiny little slingshots, right? And he would tie this rubber band, and he'd cut out a little leather oval, and he'd tie those to the wings of that Y-shaped branch. And right at the middle, he would carve our initials into it, so we would know that it was our very own slingshot. Now, I never shot anything with it, right? I likely never even got a stone more than about a foot in front of me because it sort of would just fall from my hands rather than being propelled by the rubber band. But y'all, that was a toy. Yes, to me, it was a treasured toy, but it was a toy all the same. Let me assure you, after doing some studying, David absolutely did not walk into battle carrying a child's toy. The Bible tells us in 1 Samuel 17:40, then he, David, took his staff in his hand, chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand, approached the Philistine. David knew what he was carrying. He knew what those 5 small stones could do, and I have no doubt in my mind that he used his slingshot with deadly accuracy before that day. After all, we know he was fiercely proud of the way he had defeated the lion and the bear in hand-to-hand combat, because he tells Saul all about it. But it's also logical to assume that before he got to that hand-to-hand combat with that lion or that bear, he tried using his distance weapon, which would have been his slingshot, right? I mean, I don't know about you. If I've got a weapon, I'm gonna try that first before the bear gets to me and I've got to hand-to-hand fight it. So back to the concept of slingers. We talked about that. These shepherds, these lowly, unskilled guys, they were tasked with caring for sheep. And each sheep in their flock has value, real monetary value. And a lost sheep or a dead sheep, that's lost income for them. So shepherds did a heck of a lot more than laze about in a meadow, singing songs and eating bread and cheese while their sheep grazed to the music of the lyre. They fiercely protected that investment that they had been charged with protecting. As a matter of fact, with their slingshot, most shepherds could accurately hit a target more than 200 yards away. Now, for those of you who, like me, have no concept of distance, that is 2 football fields long, end zone to end zone twice. We see representations of medieval tapestries that slingers had the ability to hit birds in flight. We see pictures of that. So the slingshot itself is not like that Y-shaped toy that my grandfather made for me. It was more like a leather pouch with 2 long cords attached. And David would have placed his stone in the leather and then swung it around his head like a cowboy would swing a lasso, but so much faster. And he would have gone around several times, the Bible tells us this, to build up that momentum and then released only one of the cords, which would send that stone flying. According to Malcolm Gladwell's book, David and Goliath, he claims that the rocks in the Valley of Elah are unique in that they are more dense than the average stone. Because of the makeup of the earth in this particular region, the stones are made with something called barium sulfate, and the result is a much heavier, much denser stone. One that, when flying at the speed of about 80 miles per hour, because that's how fast a slinger could throw a stone, this ultra heavy, ultra dense, 80 miles per hour stone would be deadly to anything it hit. And as a matter of fact, scientists now propose that David's stone was the modern day equivalent of a .45 caliber pistol. Now, we know how this story ends. There's some taunting from Goliath about this little boy who has come to defeat him. And then David gives this wonderful speech about how his God is about to show his mighty power and that the battle is already won. It's really beautiful, and it's such an amazing display of confidence from David. And I love this because, ladies, if we would go into every situation with this confidence, it would be life-changing. Listen to what David says after being taunted by this big giant that says, "You're the guy? Okay." So David said to the Philistine, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands. Right? David is like, yeah, I'm small. I'm a shepherd. Doesn't matter. I've got God. He even goes as far to say, not only will I feed your carcass to the birds, which incidentally, if you read a few verses up, that's what Goliath taunts David with. But David claims that he will give the entire Philistine army's carcasses to the birds. Not just Goliath, all of them. Y'all, this is huge. I'm telling you, I wish that I woke up every single morning with this kind of confidence. Like, for real. Good morning, world. See all these big, hard, horrible things that I have to do? Yeah, well, get out of my way, because God showed up today and he is going to smite them all. I mean, I don't even know what smite means, but I'm sure that God would do it. So you see, when we look at the battle between David and Goliath, we see God working in such a big way. But he's working in someone who, at the time, seemed perfectly ordinary. We know David was in the right place. We know David had the right skills. We know David trusted the right plan. And based on what we've studied today, David had the right tools. But what didn't David have? He didn't have a fancy set of armor. He didn't have a title. He didn't have an important, valued job. He didn't have a string of supporters cheering him on. As a matter of fact, Saul and his brothers were like, yeah, no. He didn't have a huge financial backer for his battle that day. The list goes on and on for David's shortcomings according to what the world was seeking. David was, for all who looked at him, ordinary, plain, nothing special. But we know everybody was wrong. Ladies, you are the same way. Maybe people look at you and they underestimate you. Has that ever happened to you? Maybe someone in your past said something to you that was defeating and you just can't forget what that person said. It's like that little parrot, like a pirate parrot, right? That sits on your shoulder. And every time you get inspired to try something new, or when you go for that dream and that bravery bubbles up, that parrot squawks and goes, no, remember that thing someone said? You can't do that. Or maybe it's you. Maybe you get in your own way too much. Maybe it isn't someone else who said or did something. Maybe it's just your own insecurities. And we know where those come from, right? That's the devil wanting to hold you back from doing the things that God has specifically created you to do. Because if you do the things that God has planned, the devil loses. But we know who ultimately wins. And I know for me, I want to fight on the right side of things. And I'd like you to come alongside me, right? Listen. You might feel like you are totally and completely ordinary. That list of things that David didn't have, you don't have them either. But guess what? You aren't. I looked up ordinary in the dictionary and it actually says commonplace, standard, with no special distinctions or features. That couldn't be further from the truth. You are special in God's eyes. You are uniquely crafted. Remember last week how I talked about the puzzle pieces that God creates? You are the puzzle piece he needs. And if you aren't willing to step out and do the thing he created you to do, imagine what the world is missing out on. I want to leave you with this verse because it's one of my favorites. Because if you don't believe anything I've said so far, listen to what God says about you. Romans 8:28 says, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose." Ladies, you've been called according to his purpose. That's you. Romans 8:28, you. David's story illustrates this perfectly. God worked for the good of David. He put him in the right place. He gave him the right skills. He had the right tools. And David is clearly someone who loved God. And we see that when he trusts God's right plan, it worked. We know, because we have the advantage of reading the rest of David's story, that he was called according to God's purpose. Ladies, you are called. You have something according to God's purpose that is uniquely yours. And this piece is crucial. If you don't understand your own non-ordinariness, then you will always be held captive by the thoughts of your own limitations. And God didn't give you limitations, not on this, not on the thing that he charged you with accomplishing for his purposes according to his plan. So instead of journal questions this week, I have actually a challenge for you. Two, really. I want you to seek out one opportunity to step out in faith. Take one step toward that dream that's been placed inside you. It might be a big step. Maybe you're finally going to go sign that lease on that building. Or just call the realtor. I don't know. Maybe it's a small step. Maybe you just need to call a friend and say, "Hey, can we meet for coffee? I have this idea and I just want to bounce it off someone. I've never told anyone about it, but I want to go over it with you." Sometimes we just need to say something out loud to make it seem real. So the second part of this challenge, are you brave enough to tell me? Y'all, YouTube has a comment section. Tell me, what is the thing that you know in your heart? Or maybe you just think it is and you're still a little uncertain. But it's the thing that God gave you. What's your mission? Be bold. Write it in the comments. Come out into the world waving your slingshot. And I cannot wait to watch you hit the target. Ladies, as always, I'm so thankful for you and thankful for your time and that you spent this time with me. If you haven't subscribed, go ahead and hit that button below. And if you would and you get any value out of this, I'd love it if you shared it with your friends. I am so grateful to you, and I hope that you have a super week. And I'm going to be watching for your comments, because this week is the week that everything changes for you. Have a great one. Bye. But if I want you to, nope. They had a solution for these times. For these times? And you also, just like everyone else, so in biblical times, they each, nope, wrong. But a battle of the gods, that the most powerful, that was a weird. If you haven't watched that video, this is still by saying, I am so excited about the gifts that you have. This is so slow. In that they are more dense than the average stone. So because of the makeup in the creates them, you are the puzzle pieces that he needs. No, you are not two pieces, just. According to Malcolm Gladwell, really? Oh, what's happening? Oh, okay. Hey, y'all. Ugh, it's so hot. I need a fan in here.